Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. As you can see by the title, today I want to talk to you about 5 major cultural shocks that I've experienced while living here in Peru. But before I get started, I want to thank each and every person that has subscribed to my channel. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. And if you have not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing to the channel. So let's get right into it. So the reason I'm making this video is I really don't like to see videos from expats, retirees, vacationers, where they only tell you the good things about a particular country that they are living in or that they have visited. So I want to put this video out there so that people can understand that I'm not trying to sell you a dream as far as what it's really like to live in Peru. So let's get into the first cultural shock that I've experienced. And this one is kind of intense because it has to do with identity theft. So let me explain what I mean. So you know how when you first land in a country, internationally, you have to go through the customs agents. And the custom agent will ask you for your passport. They'll ask you a few questions about why you were visiting the country, just random questions like that. But they will take a picture of your passport for the record, for the country's record. So one of the things I experienced was when I landed in Peru, everything was all good, but within probably a week or two, I got a message from my credit bureau saying that my information, my personal information had been compromised. And I thought, wow, why would that happen? And since it was very quickly, I went and I checked online to see what information had been leaked. And I found that it was my social security number, my passport number, basically information that is a part of my passport had been suddenly leaked on the dark web, according to my credit report. And I thought, how could that have happened? I haven't shared my passport with anybody. I haven't shared my information with anybody. I haven't signed up for anything online. And then when I put 2 and 2 together, I realized that the only place in which I had shared my current address, my current information as far as where I live, my social security number, was when I landed in Peru and had to share my passport with the passport agent. And I remembered that the same thing had happened when I went to the Dominican Republic. Guys, when I went to the Dominican Republic, I had to do the same thing. I went through the customs agents. They ask you a few questions. They take I think a physical picture of your passport. They ask you how long you're staying, etc. But within a week or so of being in the Dominican Republic, I got the same alert that, hey, your information has been compromised and you need to check and make sure that identity theft does not occur, because if you don't take action at that time, it can become a problem later on if it's not a problem initially. So the same exact information was leaked. Your current, whatever address you have on your passport will be there in this report, your social security number, and also things like your passport number. So that's something to think about if you're a person that wants to travel in Latin America. Think about the fact that in a lot of these countries, there is a lot of corruption. So what that means is sometimes there'll be somebody working at the airport and they have a side job of selling personal information of tourists to the dark web. And this is, I saw this on the news too when I was in the Dominican Republic. There were people working at the airport who had this side job of selling tourist information. During the weekends or whenever they have time, they sell people's personal information on the internet, basically. And so this is something that you will need to be aware of if you decide to visit not only Peru, but Mexico, Dominican Republic, especially places like Brazil. You're going to increase your risk of experiencing identity theft because your information somehow magically is transferred from the passport people who ask you the pertinent questions to enter the country onto the dark web within weeks of being in a country. So that's the first cultural shock that I experienced, and it's something that you need to be aware of as you travel through Latin America, not only Peru. So the second cultural shock that I've experienced here in Peru has to do with traffic and public transportation. Listen, guys, the traffic here is insane. And this is coming from somebody who's lived in New York, who's lived in Los Angeles, who's visited places like Washington, D.C., where the traffic is insane. The traffic is insane. It's very difficult if you're a person that wants to walk to and fro, to do simple things like cross the street. You literally will risk your life trying to cross the street here in Peru. And at early morning hours, you will see that the traffic jams are insane. It's something that I did not expect. Although I knew Lima was a major city with a lot of people, I did not expect for every single person to actually have a car. Because what are we taught in the United States? We are taught in the United States that these are third world countries and people don't have money. But that's absolutely, positively not the case. Believe me when I tell you, everybody, or it feels like everybody here has their own car. So what that means is traffic jams, waiting in traffic, risking your life to do things like cross the street. I really cannot emphasize enough how difficult it is to move about in traffic. You really do need to leave your home early if you have an appointment to go somewhere. You need to give yourself an extra 30 minutes to an hour to get to Miraflores, for example, from another part of the city. It's just something that I thought, wow, this city has so many people and so many different cars, and I was not expecting that at all. So that's something you need to consider. If you're thinking about moving to Peru, are you going to be a person who would dare to drive in the crazy traffic? Are you going to be a person like me who wants to take the bus? Are you going to be a person that likes to walk everywhere? These are things you need to consider before moving here. So one of the things I decided to do was begin to become comfortable taking the bus. Listen, guys, I'm not going to lie to you. I was terrified. I was intimidated by the bus, by the people, by having to use the language as I get on and off the bus, because they don't collect the money on the bus like they do in the United States. For example, when you get on the bus in the United States, at the entrance, the bus driver takes your money and later you just go take your seat. No. Here in Peru, the bus driver tells you to pass on, and there's a person that stands like literally in the middle of the bus and holds up his hand and tells them, and you have to tell him what area you're going to, and then later he tells you how much he's going to charge you and you have to pay him in cash. So no credit cards. Like in the United States, we are very much accustomed to being able to swipe our cards for almost everything. You cannot do that here. You have to have money in cash to be able to move about in the bus or on the bus here in Peru. So that's the second big thing. The traffic combined with how intimidating the bus system is. Now, I'm a person who lived in New York and I thought the subway system was intimidating, but it's nothing considered to sitting on a bus here in Peru. So think about that. If you're thinking about traveling here, it's a major, it was very difficult for me at first, but now I feel like little by little, I'm getting more comfortable doing it, but it is something to consider. How will you get around? The third thing really shocked me. The third cultural shock has to do with the weather. So I arrived in Peru during their winter season. And their winter season, I thought, oh, it'll be mild. It's a Latin American country. Like I experienced winters in Mexico. And of course, Mexico City is a place that gets really cold. So I'll be used to it. No, guys. It is winter for real in Peru. Like meaning that in my apartment, oftentimes I would be freezing. So I had to request a small heater from my host when I initially arrived, because usually the apartments do not come with any sort of heating and air conditioned systems. So what that means is if you want heat, if you want air, you're going to have one of those small mini systems to accommodate you for a small amount of time. The cold combined with the moisture is not a good combination. So a lot of the apartments do have mold problems. I'm not going to lie to you and try to pretend like it's not true. No, a lot of the apartments are built on the water, especially if you have an apartment that is directly on the water on the coast and has a view of the water. What that means is you're directly on the water and you can have this really great view, but at the same time your apartment may have humidity problems. Your apartment may have mold. And it's definitely, if you're going to be here in the wintertime, you're definitely going to be cold. And I do mean freezing. At one of the apartments that I had, I literally had to walk around with my coat on because it was so cold. Now, many people have told me that this is one of the most intense winters that Peru has had in a long time. Nevertheless, the apartments are cold, they are humid, and they can be uncomfortable if you don't choose the right place. So that was another culture shock for me as I began to transition and make myself comfortable here in Peru. The next cultural shock that I experienced has to do with the prices. So before I came here, I was in Colombia, in Cali, in Bogota, in Medellin. And the prices in those places, especially in Cali, are much cheaper than here in Peru. As you can see from my previous video, it is normal to be able to find an apartment here in Peru for about $700, $800. But in Cali, it's normal to be able to find an apartment from $400 to $550. And that's a huge difference when you're a person that's trying to travel or live in a different place on a budget. So I would say the prices here for food, for apartments, for houses, for transportation are much higher than they were when I lived in Mexico City, for example, when I lived in Colombia. When I was in Brazil, it was cheaper as well. I think Brazil, probably an apartment in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, where I was probably about $200 to $250 cheaper than what you will find in Peru. So Peru honestly for me was surprisingly more expensive than I expected, especially for things like food. So in Mexico City, even though it's still cheap, you're going to spend less money in Colombia. You're going to spend less money in Mexico. You're going to spend less money in Brazil. Even in places like where I've also lived in South Africa, you're going to spend less money for food in South Africa. And I don't know what the reason is, guys, but I can tell you that I spend more money here on basics, food, clothes, shelter than I did when I lived in other countries that were pretty much similar in terms of the economy of the people, how much money people earn per month, how much money people earn per year is pretty much on par with Mexico or Colombia, but nevertheless, the prices are much higher here in Peru. So I saved the most interesting cultural shock for last. Cultural shock number 5 has to do with something that I was surprised to see when I arrived. And that is the constant protests and crowds that are in the streets here in Peru. And okay, so let me explain what's going on. Right now in Peru, there's this big uproar about extortion. So what's happening, according to what the local people are telling me, so there are a lot of immigrants coming in from different countries like Venezuela, and what they are doing to survive is applying pressure to the people of Peru. They are doing things like charging people money to park their car. And if you do not pay them to be able to park your car, what happens? Well, you'll come out of the establishment, whether you're getting your hair done, getting your nails done, shopping, you'll come out and your car won't be there. And so this is an ever-present threat. So what's happening with that is that there are protests now in the streets from taxi drivers, from bus drivers, from business owners who are saying that they want the police in Peru to do more to protect them from extortion, basically. Because it seems like because there's so much corruption in all of these Latin American countries, but specifically Peru right now I'm talking about, is that the police are involved, and so the police will not arrest the people who are doing the extortion. So what happens, and you'll see it, If you're taking the bus, you'll see somebody get on the bus and say, okay, 50 soles to pass, or 20 to pass. And so a lot of people are sick and tired of having to simply pay to work. So imagine showing up to your job one day and somebody saying, okay, you want to work today? Let's say you're a taxi driver. Pay me $50 and I'll let you pass. Pay me $60 and I'll let you work today. That's essentially what's happening right now in Peru, and it's really sad. And because of that, there are protests in the streets. There are people that are on the news every day complaining and begging the police and also the local government to intervene, because what has happened is the people went from simply stealing your car or flattening your tire, or breaking out your window when you refuse to pay. They began to kill people. And so that has been a huge shock for me, to know that there are people coming from other countries and participating in extortion to the point of killing people when they won't pay them a particular toll to be able to do their job. And I think that that is absolutely insane. So that's all I have for today. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and please like this video. If you have any other cultural shocks that you want to share from living in Peru, please feel free to drop down in the comments and share them with us. And if you're living in another country, I would love to hear about the cultural shocks that you've experienced in that country. Drop down in the comments and let us know, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.